everybody, and welcome to AJTV, episode 14. I'm AJ Soccer, and I am so excited and happy to be making these again. As you can see, I'm no longer affiliated with any websites, which means that the only reason I'm able to do this for you is thanks to the support of the kind people over on the Patreon. So if you like the show and want to support it, consider checking it out right there. And I'll talk a little bit about it at the end. But for now, I have an awesome match for you guys. It is the quarterfinals of the Pro Tour Origins in Vancouver that just happened between Joel Larson and Stephen Neal. Red deck wins versus red deck wins. Let's look at the deck lists. A couple of slight differences. Joel has Fire Drinker Satyrs, which are obviously comically bad in this matchup, as well as all 4 Lightning Berserkers, whereas Stephen Neal has 2 Chandras, which are also not great in this matchup, a main deck Heel Cutter, and only 2 Lightning Berserkers. Another big difference is Stephen Neal has his Eidolon's main deck, whereas Joel's are in his sideboard, though he does bring them in. Stephen Neal, on the other hand, has only 3 Searing Bloods main, a nice little arrow there, with this 4th in the sideboard, but Joel has all 4 main and a Fiery Impulse. You'll often hear the phrase fighting fire with fire, and it's usually used in the context of matching somebody's level of aggression, but that's not actually what the phrase means. Fight fire with fire means to be very precautious and take preventative measures in the case of quickly spreading wildfires. You set smaller controlled fires in front of the fire to burn up all of the fuel, the logs and whatnot, so that when the wildfire gets to that point, it doesn't have any more resources, gets choked out, and dies down. You may ask, what the hell does this have to do with Magic the Gathering? But it's actually a pretty accurate description of how these matchups play out. These burn decks are not won by the player that takes the most aggressive stance, but rather the one that has the most resources left over. Obviously it doesn't tell the whole story, but it is a little illustrative of this if you look at the end of the 3 games and the resources the players had left. This is why you see the players choosing to draw first in a matchup between 2 very aggressive decks. So as stated, Stephen Neal, despite being the higher seed, chose to draw. Joel has a 1-drop, which is nice, but Fire Drinker Satyr, not exactly the 1-drop you want. Searing Blood is like the best card in the matchup by far, and Fire Drinker Satyr just turns all of your opponent's spells into Searing Bloods, which is not ideal. Sure enough, it gets slashed. Zergo as the follow-up isn't too bad. Stephen Neal plays an Eidolon, which gets Fire Impulsed, but that kind of acts like another Searing Blood, you know. Joel had to take 2 to kill it. Lightning Berserker gets in for 2 here on the dash, and Joel deploys another Fire Drinker Satyr. Stephen Neal has a really good turn here of Swift Spear, Lightning Strike your Fire Drinker Satyr and get in for 2, so kill your guy, deal 5 to you. I actually wouldn't have minded Swift Spear staying back on defense because of this Berserker that gets in for 4, and the Lightning Strike on offense, or I'm sorry, on defense, makes it kind of hard for Joel to play. But I don't mind, with all the incidental damage that Steven is dealing this game, I don't mind taking the aggressive stance there and trading 2 damage for 4 if Joel wants to spend his whole turn. Meanwhile, Steven plays one of his 2 Abbots in hand, revealing a Lightning Berserker that he just casts, Swift Spear, and get in for 2. Berserker back to block Berserker. Also, dashing it is a little inconvenient when Steven's last card is Abbot, so he doesn't know what his mana situation is going to be on the next turn necessarily. And this is the turn where I think Steven makes his first major misstep. Joel has Berserker and 2 cards in hand, which happen to be a second Berserker and Exquisite Firecraft. And Steven has a far superior board and an Abbot in hand, It's basically 2 cards plus his draw for the turn. Yol attacks with the Zergo, and Steven doesn't block. I really dislike this. I think the Abbott block is pretty natural. The difference between 8 and 10 is obviously substantial, and I think that Steven is pretty advantaged. He's got a much better board. His hand of Abbott and plus whatever he draws is better than a lot of Yol's hand combinations. With the, double Berserker in defense mode is not exactly the most threatening. I think Steven Neal should have taken that opportunity to preserve his life total and sort of assume the control role, as I think that suits this game better for him. But instead he just takes the 2. The defense mode Berserkers do come out. Lots of math for Steven. He ends up playing the second Abbott after drawing a Wild Slash for turn and hits a Stoke the Flames off of it. Lots of action. After quick considerations, he ends up making what I believe to be the correct attack of sending Abbott and a Swift Spear. And Yol fairly quickly blocks after the attackers are declared. Steven's giving him plenty of time to think about it while attacking. But considering this is such a crucial point in the game, that's a relatively fast block. And I'm going to pause it here and we'll look at this game state. So here's the game state. Abbott revealing the Stoke, these 2 creatures attacking, and the Lightning Berserker blocking. Commentators point out that Steven Neal does have lethal if he goes for it, which is true. You tap your 3 creatures for Convoke and a Mountain, Stoke the Face, that's 4 damage. Wild Slash off of the other Mountain, also to the face, that's 6 damage. And Swift Spear is 1 plus 2 prowess triggers for 9. Game over. Problem with this is Yol has a card in hand, and if it is, say, a Lightning Strike or a Searing Blood, then it's pretty easy for him to win. If it's Searing Blood, then it's lethal already. You just Searing Blood the Swift Spear in response to the second prowess trigger, and then Berserker and Zergo are lethal as all your creatures are tapped out for Convoke. But even if it's Lightning Strike, it's pretty close to lethal. You Lightning Strike the Swift Spear, and then you can attack back for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So any mountain or any burn spell that does more damage than it costs mana. So not Stoke, but Searing Blood, Lightning Strike, and Exquisite Firecraft all do it. So that's a lot of outs. So instead, what Steven does is the very conservative route of Wild Slash your Berserker, Stoke Zergo, hit for 3 from the Swift Spear, down to 6, tapped out, and passing the turn. I don't like this as much. I think better than both of those options is the following. You actually lead with tapping a mountain and your 3 creatures for Stoke to the face. Put Yol down to 5, and both your creatures get prowessed. Now you pass priority. If Yol doesn't pump, then, let's say if he does pump, he pumps the Berserker to get it to trade, then you Wild Slash his face and win the game. Easy peasy. If he does not pump, then you hold the Wild Slash. Yol has to have the 2 mana burn spell that he's representing and draw another burn spell, because you still have your Wild Slash and a mountain. So you can slash the Berserker. So say you take 3 from the burn spell down to 5. Zergo is going to hit you for 2 down to 3. Yol has to draw exactly Lightning Strike, Exquisite Firecraft, Stoke the Flames, or Berserkers. That is a lot less outs than any mountain, Lightning Strike, and Wild Slash. But Steven Neal doesn't take that line. He just leads with Wild Slash, on the Berserker that stayed home. Yol does pump. And Stoke comes down on the Zergo. So now Steven decides that he wants to be the control and make the game go longer, but it's a little late as now has an overwhelming position, but that 2 extra damage and 1 extra turn that Yol gets end up being enough. Spoiler alerts. That is how this game ends. Swift Spear in defense mode. Firecraft your face. Down to 4. Stephen Neal going for a little showmanship slams the top card, but it is a mountain when a huge percentage of his deck, about over a third of his deck, is lethal. Leaves back a Swift Spear to block a drawn Berserker, which is good because that would have been lethal, but kaboom! Craig Jones style. So for fun, let's see just how lucky Yol actually got there. This is the game state, or the state of the deck lists rather, when that chain of events began. So Yol has 49 cards left in his deck, and his clean outs, he needs a 1-drop to survive. And Fire Drinker Satyr and Zergo don't do it because they don't block well enough to survive. So his outs are the 4 Swift Spears, the 2 Lightning Berserkers left. Fiery Impulse is gone, but the Wild Slashes are still here. So that's 8 clean outs out of 49 cards. But he can also hit one of his 4 Abbots left in the deck into one of his 17 Mountains left in the deck, which is 4 redraws at 40 out of 49, gives him a then 17 out of 48, which is 8.16% of the time he can then hit a 35.4%er for an additional 2.9% on top of the 8 out of 49. Which shakes out to about 20.4% itself, giving him a total of 23.3% to survive, or to draw something to survive. Then it goes back to Steven, who has 14 cards gone, so he can hit any of his 11 spells, his 3 Zergos, his 1 Berserker left, or the Heel Cutter. That's 16 clean outs out of 46 cards, plus he has 2 Abbots, which can hit any of the aforementioned except for the Heel Cutter, which means about 4.3% of the time he then gets a 15 out of 45 or a 1 in 3 shot for an additional 1.5% chance of winning. 16 clean outs with 46 is about 34.8%, and the additional 1.5% gives him a total of 35.3% chance to win on the spot, which means that Yol has about a 74.7% chance of surviving the turn. Going back Yol's way, he has now 48 cards left in his deck, or actually technically just under that thanks to the Abbot into land outs last turn, but he has 3 Firecrafts and all 4 Stokes as outs, which is a 7 in 48, which gives him a 14.6% chance of ripping a 4 damage burn spell to kill Steven. So looking at all these individual events and knowing they all have to happen, we have the 23.3% times the 74.7% times the 14.6%, which comes out to a total of about 2.5% chance of y'all coming out of that victorious. That's about a 1 in 40 shot. So, pretty fortunate. There are a couple other finicky things, such as the 3 Eidolons from Steven, or one of his 2 abbots into one of the 3 Eidolons, or Eidolons. Those would actually cut off the exquisite firecrafts from Yol as outs, making his winning draws only the 4 Stokes instead of the 7 burn spells. There are also abbot redraws of abbot into firecraft if the turn before Yol survived by going abbot into mountain. All of these are pretty small percentages, and we're just doing some napkin math, so I'm not gonna worry about it. But lots of stuff with all the math of redraws and whatnot going on here. So for sideboarding, Yol's bringing in the Chandras. Just games go long, get grindy. Chandra's very good in those games, and Eidolons, bringing those in to be Searing Bloods with legs. Fire Dancers and Arc Lightnings some would consider, but they aren't actually that good against Stephen Neal's deck or sideboard plan, so those stay out. He cuts, obviously, the Fire Drinker Satyrs are terrible. He shaves a Zergo, just his worst creature, and he's bringing in a bunch of Eidolons, so he's okay cutting a dude. The one that's interesting to me is he actually cut 2 Exquisite Firecraft. Normally, I would agree with this. This card's not good. What matters in the matchup is the creatures, the repeatable sources of damage. And as a removal spell, Firecraft is very bad, and as a damage source, it is not repeatable. So normally, I would agree completely with this. The reason I don't like it as much is because Stephen Neal is bringing in Thunderbreak Regents. So instead of Yol's Chandras, Stephen Neal is going over the top with 3 Thunderbreak Regents, an Outpost Siege, a Molten Vortex, and then to get underneath in the aggressive matchup, the 4th Searing Blood, obviously, as well as a Magma Spray. So against the 3 Thunderbreak Regents, I actually like the Firecrafts, even though you have to take damage for them. It's pretty important to be able to kill the 4/4. Something I found a bit interesting at the time with Stephen Neal's sideboard plan is he's bringing in the Vortex, which is, the Seismic Assault type card, as well as 4 4-drops, and is not bringing in the 22nd land. I'm not sure what his out numbers are. I mean, there's some pretty clear cuts, Chandra and probably the Heel Cutter. But I'm not sure what his numbers are, but I would imagine I would want to find a way to fit the mountain in, especially if I know that I'm going to end up on the play. So for game 3, I would bring it in just in case Yol chooses to draw first, as Steven does in games 1 and 2. But yeah, we are going to skip game 2 because it's not that interesting. So let's go straight to game 3. So for game 3, Yol actually chooses to draw first, which he said that he was not going to do in the pre-match discussion, but I don't know. From watching those 2 games play out and knowing how much Steven liked drawing first, choosing to do it in the first 2 games, he changed his mind. And sure enough, Stephen Neal plays Zergo, which gets slashed, and then a post-combat Lightning Berserker. Yol passes, which is obviously pretty suspicious. Stephen Neal pumps once, leaving up a Searing Blood. And Yol does oblige with his own Searing Blood on the Berserker. Swift Spear and get in for 1. Post-combat Eidolon, which does eat the Searing Blood. And Stephen Neal takes 2 from the trigger. He ends up drawing a Thunderbreak Regent this turn. So his hand is Stoke, Thunderbrick Region, Outpost Siege with no 4th land, which is pretty unfortunate. Takes the opportunity to kill the Swift Spear here. And Yol just plays a Eidolon and passes. 4th land does come, and the dragon follows. And Yol has 5th land, Berserker. And here, I think, is where Stephen Neal's blunder in this game happens. He ends up just taking the Berserker attack, and Yol pumps it 4 times for 5 damage out of Stephen Neal's life total. I greatly prefer blocking here. I think that this block is going to be forced next turn anyway, and you can save 5 points of damage by doing it now. Obviously, it sucks to trade your 4-drop for a 1-drop, but you get most of Yol's turn, if not all of it, and you're untapping and playing an Outpost Siege, so you want the game to go long, you want life totals to be high. You know you're probably taking at least 4 from the Eidolon, as it's going to get an attack in, and then you'll have to kill it at some point. So by going to 9, you're going to an effective 5, which is pretty dang risky. So I really, really would have preferred to see a block there from Stephen Neal, but instead he goes down to 9, untaps, draws an Abbot, and sure enough plays the Outpost Siege on Khans. We got a reader. There it is. Fancy little logo. Yol draws another land, and sure enough, plays the Berserker, dashed again, taking 2 from his own Eidolon, and then attacks. You can see Stephen Neal reeling there a bit from the attack. I think that he thought that by leaving his Thunderbrick Region back, the Eidolon would be deterred from attacking, but that is a misevaluation. As Yol correctly identified, the Lightning Berserker attack is basically a forced trade. If Steven tries to eat the Eidolon and the Berserker gets in there for 6, then any burn spell is lethal, and that's not a good place to be. When you have an Outpost Siege and a bunch of big cards in your deck, including an Abbot in your hand, as both players do have, in Steven's position, you want the game to go as long as possible. You want to preserve your life total as much as possible, and that means that this block is basically forced, which if it's forced this turn, it should have been forced last turn. So Stephen Neal should essentially be at 5 more life than he is now. Yol obviously then gets to play Abbot this turn, and could have hit something off of that, and the game is completely different. But I think that it's a pretty clear mistake on Steven's part there. He used a Lightning Strike to take out the Eidolon before playing an Abbot of his own, which hits a land, which is nice, but not as nice as a Stoke the Flames, which is what Yol's hits. He actually makes a pretty major mistake here by stoking the face and then playing Zergo. Much, much better is playing Zergo first and then using the Zergo to convoke out the stoke, and the Abbot then gets to stay back and block. Zergo obviously cannot block due to its rules text. With 2 cards in hand for Steven, a card coming off of the Outpost Siege, and a draw for the turn, with an Abbot and 5 lands, it's pretty easy for him to assemble a lethal combination here. Something like a Swift Spear, and then 6 points of burn with 4 mana and 3 cards. Not hard to do. 2 Lightning Strikes or a Wild Slash and a Firecraft, something like that. Those are all lethal combinations, whereas if the Abbot were back to block, you limit all those combinations down to ones that include a Searing Blood, which is a pretty substantial difference in percentage Thankfully for Yol, he does not get punished for that mistake. Stephen Neal tanks forever and comes out with a play that doesn't matter because Yol draws another burn spell off the top for lethal. For completionist's sake, I will allow the game to finish. Here we go. Kill your thing with my thing. Fourth land, stoke your other thing, attack for 4, I think is the play, which I agree with. It's the best you can do. You need golden brick for full brick for a turn. Yeah, I actually forgot. He doesn't do this. He holds this back to play around a dash creature. That doesn't really make any sense. You're gonna lose to a lot of combinations. You need to close the game out fast. There was a point in the game where you have an outpost siege and a big deck and an abbot in hand where you can make the game go longer, but at 1 life that is no longer making the game go longer is no longer very incentivized. I think that 4th land, stoke the Zergo, attack for 4, hit Yol down to 9, hope that he draws exactly a land, and then you can hopefully kill in the next turn or 2. I think that that's a much cleaner way to play it, although obviously it doesn't matter because Yol is the luckiest and draws the Firecraft, and it goes right there to his face. -3. Ba-bam. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you liked it. I'm really hoping to do these regularly again, but I need your help. So the first thing you can do is tweet or retweet or share or just tell your friends about the show. I know a lot of people enjoyed AJTV when it was back on a website that they checked anyway, but now that it is solo style, I want to make sure that anybody that would want to see the show knows it exists. The next thing you can do is check out the Patreon for the show. There is a little video about it. It's under 90 seconds long, so I know you can spare a minute. Please give it a watch. It would mean a lot to me if you checked it out. Speaking of Patreon, this episode of AJTV was brought to you by Blue Spider, Lark Drifter, aka Sergey S, Candlehawk, Perry K, J King 1982, Surf Cat, Dern, and everybody else who supported the Patreon. Thank you all so much, and please go check it out. If you want to give to the show without using Patreon, there's also a direct donate link in the description below that I use for my stream, but you can let me know that your donation is for AJTV as a note. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.